the point of this whole time is to really take a look at whether the Yugas as a system of human development gives us any insight into what's happening to us now, and more importantly, perhaps what might happen to us in the future. So I'm going to take you through a few things. I'm going to start with just a simple overview of what the Yugas are, in case there's some of you are unfamiliar with it, and then we're going to dive into some perhaps more recent and pertinent kind of information. So, Ramurti, you want to put the slide up? Tonight, we're talking about our turbulent times through the lens of the Yuga cycle, and let's just take a look at a very simplified diagram of what the cycle of the Yugas is. So it comes to us from ancient India, Vedic India, that there is a recurring 24,000-year cycle of human development. And that what you see here is obviously a circle, because the idea is that the Yuga cycle repeats over and over and over again. And the cycle that we are currently in began in 11,500 BC, followed all the way through these different ages to arrive at our present day, more or less accurately here at approximately 2000 AD. The Yugas went through 4 ages of development. And the highest age is Satya Yuga. So Satya Yuga is an age where mankind as a whole is able to perceive and know God, basically the infinite spirit, that they can see that all the various layers of reality have at their base God consciousness and the intelligence of God. Many of the myths come from, or heaven on earth, go back to this time. Now, Satya Yuga is still a very high age, but mankind as a whole has lost the ability to directly perceive God in creation, but they still have the ability to perceive thought directly, to control thought. Mental telepathy would be the common way in which people communicate during Satya Yuga. And people would be very powerful still. So a high age, just not as high as Satya Yuga. Guapara Yuga is often referred to as the age of energy, but in descending Guapara, it really matches the age of magic. And I'll be getting into that more ahead. Kali Yuga, the last of the 4 eras within the cycle, is the material age. So mankind as a whole has lost all of those abilities, and the last remaining ability that is common to men in Kali Yuga is to be able to perceive through the senses. So it's often, because of that, referred to as the material age. And then the whole cycle begins to coming into a flow that very powerfully affects all of mankind. It affects the way we think, the way we perceive, what we feel, what we know, and what we can understand in a broad sense. So that's the basic idea of the cycle of the Yugas. And what I'm going to go into next is what I refer to as the Renaissance effect. And this will become a little more meaningful once I take you through a few slides here. So the Renaissance was a time of the flowering of many of the arts, the painting, sculpture, architecture. All of those came to very great heights during the period of the Renaissance. Also during the Renaissance, though, what mankind as a whole was thinking about. So Petrarch was a church father, Catholic church father in the Renaissance, and Hobbes was really the first thinker to consider that there might be basic human rights. Astonishingly enough, hopefully you got the gist that the Renaissance was a rebirth of art, philosophy, science, human rights, etc., that existed in the Golden Age of Greece, bringing back to life what had been lost for 1,000 or more years in the Dark Ages. So that's where the Renaissance comes from, the rebirth of ancient Greece. Easier to see how they compare is I'm going to take the bottom portion of the cycle. First, I'm going to lay it flat. I'm going to cut it in half. And then I'm going to stand the halves next to each other. So this is 700 BC. This is the beginning of descending Kali Yuga, going down to the end of descending Kali Yuga in 500 AD. And then we take it up again from 500 AD up to 1700 AD. So we've taken the curves and we've just sort of straightened them out and put them next to each other. Now, I'll put in the dates in relationship to Kali Yuga of the Renaissance, and then I'll add the dates of the Golden Age of Greece and the great thinkers. So not only was this a resurgence, a rebirth, a renewal of the Golden Age of Greece, they were also tuning into the same kind of thoughts, the same kinds of issues in the Renaissance as they did in the Golden Age of Greece, because they were in the same period of human development. And you can see this Renaissance effect throughout the Kali Yuga. I don't have time to go into all of the amazing comparisons. There are some along about here in ascending Kali Yuga. We had the first tentative expression of the notion that the sun didn't orbit the Earth, but the Earth orbited the sun. Well, there was a scientist in this same, relative to the Kali Yuga, same area of the cycle, who also had shown that the Earth rotates around the sun. And in fact, there's reason to believe that all the way back in time into descending Guapara Yuga, descending Treta Yuga, etc., they knew that the Earth rotated around the sun. And we only lost that knowledge in this lower portion of Kali Yuga. So this is kind of fun. Doesn't have much to do with our turbulent times at the moment, but I wanted you to appreciate just how specifically, very, very closely, what was happening in this era was mirrored in this era. So now we're going to move in and we're going to look at in the case of descending Guapara, the last 3 to 5 centuries of Dwapara Yuga. Remember, it's 2,400 years altogether. The last 3 to 5 centuries are a slice about like that. And then we're going to look at what has, compare that to the 3 to 5, or in our case, 3 centuries in the beginning of ascending Guapara. So we'll start with the past. Guapara Yuga, and I'll get into this more yet to come. But Guapara Yuga, descending Guapara Yuga, was really an age of magic. But by the end of Guapara Yuga, they couldn't work magic as well. There's a lot of historians who basically document and find quotations from papyri, et cetera, who lived in that era. And towards the end of descending Guapara Yuga, they had to do more and more to make magic work. They did more spells, they did more incantations, they did more rituals, they had more temples to more gods, almost desperately trying to hang on to what had been a normal, everyday capability in the earlier sweep of descending Guapara Yuga. And one of the consequences when that came to an end, when magic was no longer easily worked, is that war increased. So from about 1200 BC down to 700 BC, war became commonplace. Most people don't realize, however, that before 1200 BC, descending Guapara Yuga, and certainly Treta Yuga, there was very little war. There's very little evidence of huge battles, giant graveyards, hugely fortified cities. There was some, but very little in comparison to the last 5 centuries. And in those last 5 centuries, what we saw was the collapse of many civilizations, many that had really basically disappeared from the average person's awareness. So we had the Hittites, who began their civilization around 1700 BC and were completely annihilated by 1200 BC in some of the early battles that took place. So this is these numbers in the past may not seem as relevant as today, but realize that the Hittites had a civilization that lasted 5 centuries. There's almost no civilizations today that are 5 centuries old. We also saw the Ugarites, another civilization that collapsed in 1200, Kassites, 1157, the New Kingdom of Egypt in 1080 BC, the Assyrians came to a close in 1076, the Shang dynasty in China, which was something like 1200 years old, came to its end in 1046. The Vedic culture, what is sometimes referred to as the Indus Valley civilization or just ancient Vedic India, that occupied most of what is the Ganges Basin and what is today northern Pakistan. That whole era came to an end, and it's the theme of the Mahabharata is really the end of Vedic civilization. In South America, Middle America, we had the Olmecs that also came to an end in the 700s BC. So this whole collapse of civilizations was actually so dramatic and so marked that historians now refer to it as the Bronze Age collapse. And part of the reason why the Bronze Age collapsed was because the Iron Age began. And the Iron Age began because, for one reason and one reason only, is that iron weapons were stronger than bronze weapons. And in that 500 years of increasing conquest and the annihilation of civilizations, iron rose to the fore as the most common material with which to make weapons. So you could easily say that this period from roughly 1200 BC, but specifically I kept it here from 1020 BC to 700 BC, you could easily say these were turbulent times. So now if we look to more recent history, we go from the beginning of ascending Guapara Yuga, which was 1700 AD, and we go to today, we see some similar things. The Colonial Era was a time of conquest and eradication of cultures and civilizations around the world by European powers. Some people fought back, there were revolutions, but again, strife, conflict, turbulence, and change. The European empires, the colonial empires, peaked in the 1800s. And this is a map showing the extent of how much of the world was controlled by a handful of European powers. There are very few gray spots that were not subjugated and controlled by one of the European countries. We had England, obviously, we had the Netherlands, France, Spain, Portugal, Italy, Russia. They all had huge empires. And they came at high cost to other cultures and other peoples. The early 1900s, we saw the beginning of the Soviet Union. The end of the colonial period, even though it was so extensive and had such an impact on the rest of the world, it too could not survive the turbulence of the times that we are still in. And then finally, the Soviet Union broke up almost 70 years later from its inception. So this has really been the story of the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries, is a lot of geopolitical upheaval and the use of force to subjugate or control other people. So we have a very strong match between what historians found in this period at the end of descending Guapara Yuga to what's happening at the beginning of ascending Guapara Yuga. So where it goes from here, and the degree of precision that is available to us with the comparing the yugas in this way is really not specific enough for me or anyone to say that, you know, what's going to happen in this blank here at the top or beyond 2020 AD. But we know from the descending Guapara Yuga, that their troubles began approximately 1200 BC, which was 5 centuries before the end. And we are only 3 centuries in. Now, the good news, I don't know if someone else has already shared this with all of you who are taking this series, but Yogananda predicted that there would be a huge turbulence at some time in our future, and that there might be catastrophe on a geological level. There might be sickness. There might be a great deal of economic difficulties. But that at the end of it, we would enter a period of 200 years of unprecedented peace in comparison to what we have been going through. So that's perhaps the best news coming from Master. We're not necessarily guaranteed that, and we certainly can see that there could be more shakeups before it all shakes out. But I wanted to give you some good news that I think is far more important than the geopolitical news. And that is that ascending Guapara Yuga is really a new age of magic. The knowledge that existed in descending Guapara Yuga is knowledge that we are now beginning to rediscover. So again, I'm going to use this same idea that we're looking at 1700 AD to 2020 AD, the last 3 centuries, and point out some very, very significant things that happened on the quieter side from all the geopolitical turbulence. In the 1790s, homeopathy was born. And homeopathy was one of the first systems that basically exploited subtle energy. And even today, people are baffled by how homeopathy could even work, because in order to prepare homeopathic remedies, you have to dilute the initial substance so many times, thousands of times, that the odds of there being even 1 atom of the original substance is, the odds are there are no atoms left. But the subtle energy has been increased in that process of what they call potentizing the remedy. So this is the first example of subtle energy not necessarily being described and proven, but harnessed. In the 1890s, we had chiropractic start to emerge. And chiropractic works on the assumption that you have nerve energy, you have life force flowing through your body, and that it gets crimped. It predominantly gets crimped in the spine, but it can get crimped anywhere in the body. And that by manipulating the body directly, you can release the flow, increase the flow of life force, and that is healing. Psychology, we may primarily think of psychology today as, a process of talking about your issues or working on your issues, but it was a huge new thought that we had hidden energies in our own brains that affected our behavior in ways that we couldn't see, we couldn't touch. They were subtle enough that they were beyond just manipulating them like we would, matter. quantum physics in the 1930s came into being, and quantum physics, among many other things, came up with an experiment known as the double slit experiment that has proven over and over and over again, thousands of experiments have been conducted, that consciousness affects matter via energy, that unless somebody is observing a energy state, it won't turn into a particle state. And that it takes a conscious agent to make matter behave like matter. Again, this was a revolution in thinking and understanding that there were very much more subtle powers beneath the surface of matter. Biofeedback, we began to learn how life force can be controlled by the mind. Holistic medicine in the 1960s kicked off a wave of books and techniques for recognizing that we are a complete whole. Our thoughts, our feelings, our body, our consciousness are all interacting, and you affect one, you affect them all. And that through the understanding of holistic medicine, there began to be more understanding of things like homeopathy and chiropractic and psychology and why they had effects on our physical health. And then in the 1960s, scientists actually began to be able to measure life force. This didn't happen in America, it happened in Russia. And that in various experiments that they conducted for many, many years, they were able to recognize and measure that people can essentially put off life force, can transfer life force, that it's something we use and throw off, so to speak. So this is what the new age of magic is looking like so far in our modern era. But in the past, these things that we now are sort of stumbling our way into, like life force, were already well known in descending Guapara Yuga. Life force in India was known as prana, in China it was known as chi, in Egypt it was known as ka, and it formed the central part of healing in ancient India, China, and Egypt. And it also formed the central part of spiritual practices. The life force tools that we use today, like yoga postures, pranayama, qigong, and tai chi, they actually originated in descending Guapara Yuga and were fully practiced even in the waning years of descending Guapara Yuga. They were commonplace. And it was only after the end of descending Guapara Yuga that these things were actually forgotten for the most part, kept alive by a handful in monasteries and such. Mind-body medicine that we started to tune into in the 1960s was the medicine of descending Guapara Yuga. Ayurveda, traditional Chinese medicine, even Egyptian medicine, all understood the mind-body relationship. And although the treatises such as Ayurveda and such as traditional Chinese medicine and ancient Egyptian medicine included a lot of anatomical knowledge that exceeded what, sort of disappeared in the Dark Ages and then began to reappear in the era of the Renaissance, that anatomical knowledge was very, very good in descending Guapara Yuga. They knew things like intracranial pulsations. They did cesarean sections successfully. They understood the anatomical locations of most organs in the body. But that wasn't the main thing they did. The main thing that they did was to heal using herbs, using mantras, using essences. And therefore these, from a mainstream Western point of view, these systems of medicine were, combinations of guesswork and superstition. Now we're beginning to understand that mind-body medicine that came into fore in the 1960s was actually just scratching the surface of what was so well formed already in these ancient systems. And then finally, meditation, which thankfully we now know is spreading all over the world, it too came to us from descending Guapara Yuga. There are seals from the Indus Valley showing yogis meditating in lotus pose. So we know that meditation existed in Guapara Yuga, and so once again, we're just catching up to it. So the reason why I think this is the good news is that whatever comes outwardly, we have this golden opportunity to rediscover the inner science of descending Guapara Yuga. We have minds and bodies that were born to be able to feel and manipulate life force. There's no way I can prove this, but I believe that if you ask somebody from Kali Yuga to rub their hands together, I'm sure all of you have done this, where you rub your hands together and then you stop after a minute or so and spread your hands apart, you actually sort of feel something. You feel a presence between your palms. It's my belief that in Kali Yuga, even if they rubbed their hands together for an hour, they still wouldn't feel anything. That life force awareness is what is our gift in Guapara Yuga and in ascending Guapara Yuga. So you will see, as we do now, that while all the turbulence is happening, there are growing numbers of people who are turning into what I refer to as experiential spirituality. It's sort of like the spiritual but not religious category. And more and more, that is the fastest growing segment of spiritual practice, is the so-called spiritual but not religious, experiential spirituality. And we see, obviously, the teachings of Yogananda, but the teachings of many systems, such as Zen and Buddhist meditation, are really being widely embraced because they already have the secrets of experiential spirituality well figured out. One of my favorite quotes: "All my best thoughts were stolen by the ancients." Ralph Waldo Emerson. So I'm going to click ahead to my shameless commerce slide, and then it's time to open up for your questions. Please ask.
I was watching when you talked about the age of magic. I don't know where I heard it or read it, but I might have been a science fiction book. I don't know, but It's said that magic is often just undiscovered science or maybe forgotten science. And I've often been of the mind that, as I started learning about Yugas, I started thinking that all the mystical mythologies of the past and all the mystical language was kind of coded way of preserving the knowledge in a way that could be understood in the descending Yugas.
I think those powers were there in the past, but we didn't recognize them as what people were describing until we ourselves began to experience them in our evolving Guapara Yuga. And I think in general, what we're going to find, maybe not we, but what mankind is going to find as it goes into higher and higher ages is that they're going to recognize things from the past that made no sense to them until they too had that ability or that perception or that understanding.
I think a lot of times wise men from those periods when they saw that, realized that maybe things were descending and thought they'd have to code the knowledge to preserve it, and then to recognize at a later time.
There is a lot to that thought. I think it can be taken too far, that people might think practically everything the ancients did was intended to help us in the future. But I do think they did leave a lot of things encoded. The Great Pyramid, one of my favorite, all-time favorite subjects, is full of indications that they knew about geometry and mathematics and subtler sciences for controlling life force than could possibly be explained in what people thought was Egypt being a very primitive place.
Yeah. And also stories from Greece and Rome. I mean, you talked of the Mahabharata, and also around the same time was the Great Trojan War that occurred too. Because I mean, it was a lot of people thought that was mythological, that they found evidence that it actually happened.
Right.
Yeah. That, you're talking about the wars that came to mind, but yeah, I think a lot of that's also.
Can I say something? In terms of magic, from the Conversations with God series, we are all, our life is a magic trick and we are all magicians, seems to resonate with me. And from shaman sorcerer information, the Castaneda works, we may be entering a time of silent knowledge again, right? That's, self-explanatory. We know things without having to logically reason them out, and that's been keeping us dumbed down for a long, long time. And the third element is in searching for solutions for the new normal, the only practical solution is a spiritual solution rather than economic or political or military or educational. There's a whole range of them which we've all tried before, and they've all fallen flat on our faces. The only real solution is spiritual, where it's basically our values. So I wonder if you could comment on that.
Well, I agree with everything you said. I think the only thing that I would, just a small thing, clarify is that the magic of descending Guapara Yuga and the magic that we're rediscovering here in our ascending Guapara Yuga is limited, and that the spiritual teachings of masters like Yogananda and Buddha and others would essentially give you the understanding and insights and abilities of those who live in Treta Yuga and Satya Yuga. That I play with the idea that we're in a new age of magic to sort of grab people's attention, but it's just the beginning, the ability to use and sense life force is just the first stirrings of you being able to go deeper. And perhaps ironically, one of the things that you want to learn to do with your life force is turn off the body, to go still and to go deep, so that you can get beyond the physical world and into the more subtle energy world and consciousness and God. That it's a, yes, we can use life force to our benefit, but we also are most served by learning to control it, pranayama, this life force control, so that we can transcend this world altogether.
Thank you.
Puru, could you comment on your insights around the pandemic and just the chaotic period that we're in right now in relationship to ascending Guapara? And is there a parallel between what's happened in descending Guapara?
It's too coarse of an instrument to match up really specifically with this time. The history that we have to rely on going back to 1000 BC is pretty uneven. Dating is always a challenge with ancient manuscripts because they use different dating systems. So I was hoping I could find some nugget where I could say, aha, this happened in India in 1020 BC, and it exactly parallels what's happening for us in 2020 AD. But I couldn't find any nuggets like that, beyond the fact that we clearly over the last 3 centuries have seen a lot of geopolitical upheavals, and they continue to come. I forget if I'm quoting the Bible or some other source, but it's certainly a time of wars and rumors of wars. I think about that when I'm reading the news. The news is just always sort of saying, well, we've got a war here, but we really might have another war over here, and we might have yet another war over here. It's a time when outward stability is shaky. And so we also know, we don't have to go all the way back to 1000 BC, know that there have been pandemics, plagues going all through past history. So it's not a unusual thing to have something like this that could affect everybody in the world.
Thank you.
Can you see, as you had things moving up in Guapara ascending, and you were going through the different more and more subtle energy applications, is there at least ideas or conjectures that you can share about where that's going? Because when we talk about the more subtle things spiritually, those are kind of going along parallel with those, although with increasing numbers. But are there other energy applications that you think will come in the future?
Well, in the immediate future, the next 10, 20, 30 years, I think we're going to see more and more healing modalities that work directly with life force. And because in some ways, we're borrowing from the past, but we're also inventing new systems like chiropractic doesn't have any particular match in the past. Perhaps the closest would be acupuncture, or just the fact that you do it for yourself. You manipulate your own skeleton by doing yoga postures, etc. But chiropractic as a science is unique, but it's using the underlying fundamental knowledge of life force. So I think we're going to see more and more of that in the future. If there are those of you who are healers, you are probably aware that there are literally hundreds of healing modalities available today. In my research for a book I'm working on now, I stumbled upon a massive book that had like 500 five-star ratings on Amazon. But it was a woman who had essentially researched and cataloged all of the healing modalities that exist in the 20th century. And it was astonishingly diverse. So I think we're going to just see that keep exploding. And then we're going to see it weave its way into more of what we might think of as mainstream medicine. They won't be distinct anymore. They'll start to marry because we know they're effective. On other fronts, I think we're seeing similar things. There are spiritual practices that are 20th century, 21st century developments that arise from people understanding, again, the basics and the goal of oneness with God. And they're using things like sound, artificially generated sound to raise the energy in your chakras. I think it's a wonderful period because that inventiveness married with knowledge of spirituality and knowledge of technology could create some amazingly effective ways to feel better, to go deeper, and to lead a happier life.
Hi, I thought I would ask kind of a follow-up question on medicine and healing and the world of doctors and so forth. I wanted to know if you had any opinion on the current state of medicine, MDs, drugs, kind of a crude system, I think, in my opinion. And do you think that there's going to be a big fight? Is it going to be a long, slow process to come out of kind of a late Kali Yuga type materialistic system of medicine into something simpler and finer, or could something rapidly change? I didn't know if you had any thoughts on the whole pharmaceutical complex and so forth, or are we going to have that?
I certainly hope things keep changing and that the pace of change accelerates, but we have a lot of people whose livelihood depends on the current system. And even with acknowledgments from them that other systems are also good, which I think does get increasingly acknowledged. Things like yoga postures are understood to be beneficial, and acupuncture, and the handful of ones that everybody knows, but they don't turn around and actually practice it themselves. They're acknowledging that this other avenue of alternative healing exists and that it's probably good, but they're really caught in this system that is driven a lot by economics and just a lot by inertia. So I think it's going to take a long time. I'm hoping there's an old saying that old theories in science are not so much abandoned because new evidence occurs that overturns the old theories, but because the old scientists die off. so I'm hoping that we don't have to have everybody in the medical profession die off before it can change. But I don't see how it's going to be quick. Even in this pandemic, there are all sorts of articles, if you're looking for them, that indicate that homeopathy, and my wife's a homeopath, full disclosure here, that during the Spanish flu, homeopathy was the single most effective treatment for the multiple years of the Spanish flu. And when that gets brought up today, it just doesn't get any credence from the mainstream. So I'd love to say yes, in 2035, the Yugas predict that all medicine is going to become energy-based, life force-based, and the pharmaceutical complex is going to be gone. But seems doubtful to me. On the other hand, I do have to say that I don't think it should all go. I think that trauma treatment is amazingly effective in Western medicine. You know, people get into horrendous traffic accidents or who knows what, where their physical body is severely damaged, and they pull them through and they rehabilitate them, and they become, if not absolutely fully functional, all but fully functional. So I don't think that'll ever go away, because most of the alternative methods, short of, you know, miraculous healing, don't have that ability to save people like that. So I think we'll still have that, and that may mean we have a certain amount of surgery for some time to come. But I would love to see people get to the point where they turn to the inner modalities first and then exhaust their workability before they turn to drugs and what's often useless surgery for things that you could heal on your own through yoga postures or other methodologies. So it'll be interesting to watch.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So why is there a 24,000 year cycle? And whatever is the cause of that, why are there these different ages within that cycle that continue to happen periodically each time you go through a 24,000 year cycle?
Okay, be happy to answer that. Before I do, I just wanted to give a shout out to Claire Finley, who I just realized is watching from Australia. And she gave me the clue that she's watching from Australia because she just put a woolly hat on, which doesn't really fit our circumstances here. So Claire, I see Claire's Facebook post often, and she is an amazing person. So I just wanted to say hello and glad to see you.
Hello, so nice to see you. Thank you.
Hello, Claire.
Hello.
So to try to answer that question, there is a lot of information that I could share around that question, but let me start with Sri Teshwar, who was the author of The Holy Science. I suppose technically he is the author of The Holy Science, long gone. But the preface to The Holy Science, which is a really very deep spiritual work, was an introduction to the 24,000 year cycle of the Yugas. And in that very short, pithy introduction, he mentions that the reason why we wax and wane from high ages to low ages and back again is because the earth is doing a kind of do-si-do with another sun. Our sun is doing the do-si-do, and we're traveling along with it. And that creates a kind of a large circle that we make that gets us closer to and then farther away from what he called the grand central sun. And that this grand center is the source of, he used the term dharma. We might be able to use substitute for that intelligent power. But in some way, as we get closer to this power, the consciousness of mankind as a whole increases until it reaches Satya Yuga, when we have heaven on earth. And then as we swing out away in this grand celestial circle that we're making, away from the grand central sun, then mankind as a whole gradually devolves until we reach Kali Yuga. So this outside influence is something that my co-author, David Steinmetz, also known as Vyasa, spent a lot of time trying to figure out. He's an astronomer and a scientist, and he really wanted to see if he could find that grand central sun, find that source, so he could understand what the power is that is affecting us. Then any circle we make that only takes 24,000 years would barely register as being closer to the center of the galaxy. The center of the galaxy is 100 million light years away. So there are problems with the kind of jumping to the conclusion that Sri Yukteswar was describing a astronomical motion. So Vyasa kind of abandoned that direction, and he started to wonder if it isn't more of a, what you might think of as an astrological motion. So one example I'll use, probably most of you have heard this term in relation to astrology, is that you can have your sun conjunct your sun. So wherever your natal sun was, whatever house your natal sun was in, you can, in periods of, what it would be, I guess a year, your sun can be out in all the other houses in terms of astrology's point of view of how the suns and planets are moving in relationship to us. And then the sun comes around and it's conjunct the sun. So astrology has a language and a view of astronomical movement all its own. And so what Vyasa came to was perhaps when Sri Yukteswar was saying that the Earth has this 24,000 year period, is that it was talking about the Earth's wobble. And many of you may know about this, but if my arm is the pole of the Earth, over a period very close to 24,000 years, the Earth's rotation, the Earth's wobble, describes a circle. And that circle is actually going around something way out there or way beneath us. So it's making a 24,000 year circle. So that could be the astronomical explanation of subtle, very little Earth movement actually having a big effect. And what would that big effect be? Is that as we tilt, so imagine you're going around and around on the Earth, and we're tilting toward a quadrant of the stars, that we're actually attuning ourselves to the vibration coming from that direction. A crystal radio set, you actually tune the frequency by getting a crystal to vibrate at varying frequencies. So if we attune ourselves to different quadrants of the universe, of the celestial neighborhood we're in, it may be that we really are changing the entire vibration of the Earth in attunement to some other location, to some other influence, rather. So, if anybody is not entirely lost by now, give yourself a gold star. But the notion is that we have this influence and that we get closer to or farther away, mankind's consciousness as a whole grows. Now, why it goes through the particular eras that it does, Satya Yuga, Treta Yuga, Guapara Yuga, and Kali Yuga, is I don't have a neat and tidy answer for that. I've thought about it a lot. And the jumps from one era to the other are not like quantum jumps. They are gradual. So each of the eras, Satya Yuga, Treta Yuga, etc., have what are known as dawn and dusk periods. So when Satya Yuga was coming to its end, there was a 400-year period of transition. And then Treta Yuga has its transition period of 300 years. So between the two, there's a 700-year period where you go from sort of pure Satya Yuga awareness to Treta Yuga awareness. So they're not rapid changes, but somehow or another, there's a distinctive enough change in our understanding and our perception, especially, that in that 700-year period, we no longer have the easy, natural awareness of God's presence, but we still have the awareness of mind. We still have the awareness of thought. And then we just, keep losing more and more of that until we get to just sensory awareness purely in Kali Yuga. Hopefully that answered your question, or started to answer your question. Any others?
Yeah, Puru, I have a question. This is Bimal. We were watching Asha's program from last week, and she was basically commenting on what Paramahansa Yogananda and Swamiji predicted about these the coming hard times that we're all going to be facing, and with the pandemic and with the economic systems unraveling. I was wondering, and she referred to the fact that there might be something in the Yugas that might give some further clarification about the future challenges that we are heading into. Do you have any specific comments in regards to that?
I wish she had told me what they were. I'm not quite sure what she would be referring to. In general, the challenges of ascending Guapara Yuga is to move away from self-interest into enlightened self-interest. So one of the hallmarks of Kali Yuga is you're basically just in a self-survival mode.
Mhm.
When you get into Dwapara Yuga, mankind as a whole has more choices. Their will is more awakened, and so they can choose to do things and accomplish things that were just not possible to the average person in Kali Yuga. But they tend to make self-interested choices. And then in Treta Yuga, we move out of self-interest as a kind of a general mode, and we get into recognizing that the only real value is to master yourself in order to serve others.
Mhm.
And then finally in Satya Yuga, mankind as a whole realizes that the deepest purpose of all is to realize the self, to realize the oneness with God. So winding that back to ascending Dwapara, we have a very self-interested world mind. It's very much approved of, admired that people make a lot of money, or that people aspire for powerful and influential positions. This is considered to be a positive for the most part in our world culture, certainly in America, which in some ways seems like the birthplace of that kind of thinking. But it has horrible consequences for individuals, and it has horrible consequences for society. It is perhaps ironic, perhaps there's some sort of unfolding, whether you see it from the point of view of the Yugas or karma, that America has a president right now who is the epitome of the self-interested ascending Guapara Yuga consciousness. He is interested in no one and nothing but Trump and what helps Trump. So maybe as it comes out, as it sort of reveals itself in all of its ugliness and uselessness and pain for people, there will be some kind of worldwide catharsis of saying, let's not ever do that again. It may be accompanied by the pandemic getting deeper. One of the things that Yogananda said about whatever it is that might happen as a world cleansing event is that people would be half as wealthy and twice as happy. So perhaps that's what Asha was alluding to. Obviously, I have no way to know. But even though we are coming out of a very low age into Dwapara Yuga, which is full of this knowledge, potentially for all of us of life force and experiential spirituality, Dwapara Yuga is still a fairly low age compared to Treta and Satya.
I wonder, you mentioned the catharsis, a great catharsis. I was thinking back when you were talking about the things that happened from the 18th to the 20th century. And I noticed you didn't mention that they had the two world wars. And I think those changed a lot of the landscape, a lot of the consciousness right there, because, before World War I, especially before World War II, a lot of the European nations were like kind of fighting in a conflict with each other. But after World War II, they started becoming more united. That was also around the time of the end of the Colonial Era. And people be more conscious of, civil rights and rights of, non-European people.
Yeah, no, I have to confess to having picked a number of milestones in that 300-year period from 1700 to today in some degree of haste. But there were a lot of choices, and World War I, World War II would have been obvious choices as well. But I think what I would say to you is that even though we're in turbulent times, we are improving. This sounds like the both can't go together, but even though there are wars and rumors of wars, and even though self-interest manifesting as a nationalistic intention to, get its before anyone else, there actually are fewer people dying from wars every year. That the actual number of people who have died in war has dropped off tremendously since times like the First and Second World War. So it's an odd way to talk about improvement, but things are getting better. And we see them not only in the subtle, but we see them in increasing life expectancy, increasing levels of health, as you say, civil rights, I think, working its way in a rather unpredictable, semi-chaotic way is just the rights of the individual in any form. So we see it in the civil rights, we see it in gay rights, we see it in national rights, racial and ethnic rights. There's some kind of deep-seated knowledge, I think, in everyone, if not in the world mind, if not in everyone in a conscious way, that everybody is entitled to be treated equally. And the fact that they're not, we get various levels of outrage over it. The Black Lives Matter movement right now sort of astonished me. I imagine it astonished all of you as well, that it didn't just stop at the US borders. It went all over the world. It touched some deep chord that minorities, and they weren't all Black, obviously, were being unfairly persecuted or suppressed. So it all is kind of bubbling out. Because ultimately, by the middle of Guapara Yuga, I think we're going to see that enlightened self-interest is going to be the norm. So that you begin to appreciate that just because you want everything and you have everything, it doesn't make you happy, A. B, taking it from other people doesn't make other people happy, and society is not happy. There's a sort of a logic to not being selfish that I think will gradually come to the fore in Guapara Yuga. And maybe this, whatever we're going through now, is going to be a major watershed towards a broader, more inclusive, more happiness-making state of mind.
This is Heidi. Does anyone hear me?
I can hear you, Heidi.
Hello, Puru. You don't know me. I'm a teacher, and I visit Ananda, LA, sometimes in the summers. But I wonder if anyone noticed my little blue hand has been up. Are you able to see that? Or do you need to change your pictures in order to see it?
I'm afraid I don't see any little blue hand. You've been raising your hand all this time?
Yeah, you can slide your pictures left to right with the arrows above, or in gallery view, you can see us all. And there's a little hand raise thing, you guys, so we can take turns speaking. You just click on participants below. When you just click on the people rather than the up arrow, it gives you the choice. And you can just raise your hand, and the person who is speaking, Puru, can call the people as their hands are up one at a time. You can call on the people who are ready, And that way we can unmute in an orderly fashion and be taking turns. I just wanted to share that, plus say hello to everyone. And I want to tell you what I got out of this meeting is actually it was what Puru said in the early beginning of the session. And thank you, Puru, for talking for more than an hour and a half to share with us. Early in the session, Puru intimated something that he is calling the Renaissance effect. And I picked up on that immediately. And I see that everything that you're elaborating on is actually this Renaissance effect. And that is what has helped me to see what could be described currently as a calamity, as an actual push towards a brotherhood. So it's pushing us to focus more on the brotherhood, which what Swami Kriyananda described and why he started his brotherhood colonies. And that how people are just going to be more inclined to work together and to recognize what's happening in the world and to participate more in the collective good. And that's what I'm seeing as the Renaissance effect. Though it was hard to hear you early on, I picked up on that immediately. And if you'd like to elaborate on that, I'm still listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi. I see Ramurti is going to find that hand raising thing soon, but we may not be there yet. So yeah, I went with the Renaissance effect as a way of talking about this, in part because I find the matchup so clear between the Golden Age of Greece and the Renaissance in terms of where they fall in the Yuga cycle. And I didn't necessarily follow through by saying it over and over that what we were exploring in the last 3 centuries of descending Guapara Yuga and the first 3 centuries of ascending Guapara Yuga are also the Renaissance effect. We just aren't obviously calling our days today the Renaissance, but it's the same thing. We're rediscovering what was already known in the past, and we're rediscovering the good and the bad. So we are, in some ways, using the same geopolitical solutions, i.e. war, to solve the problems that we perceive happening around us, which is what was practiced in the last 5 centuries of descending Guapara Yuga. So we're doing it again. The good news is if we can make it through another century or two, the Renaissance effect would say that it's going to be largely peaceful in the sense of no war, but it's still probably going to be self-interested. I've often tried to imagine if we extrapolate a line from how fast wealth is being accumulated these days out a couple hundred years. Are we going to have quadrillionaires? And I think that may be where self-interest goes. It leaves war behind because war is wasteful and ultimately doesn't do much for people. But self-interest will probably still find its way in the accumulation of wealth and power. So we may have outward peace at least, but we'll still probably have a modicum of strong self-interest until that too peters out into enlightened self-interest.
I just wanted to thank you, Puru, for taking the time to be with us tonight. It's greatly appreciated. And this whole series that Rob Murty helped us initiate, and to have you be a part of it and a greater understanding of the Yugas, just to give us a broader context, we very much appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, my pleasure, and it has been a privilege to teach on them always. People always find them fascinating, and I'm almost as much fascinated by that fact as anything else. It seems to be a kind of a deep-seated understanding that the future is full of promise because the past was full of promise. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Puru. And I did want to just mention that you have other books out, notably The Physics of God.
Physics of God has been out since 2017, I think. And it is kind of fits in with a genre of books. It stands out from the genre in some ways, but it fits in with a genre of books such as the Tao of Physics that Fritjof Capra wrote in the 70s. And there have been, oh, thank you, covers being shown. And essentially what was discovered early in 20th century really is that there are significant parallels between the discoveries of science, such as quantum physics, and the experiential spirituality, that is what you read about and learn about when you follow the lives of the saints and mystics and sages around the world. So that's really what the book is about, is showing the parallels and the intersections between those two sides really of the same truth. So scientists come at it by experiment and saints come at it through experience. Scientists tend to use mathematics, the saints tend to use prose, and that's where it tends to get fuzzy, because it's like trying to get two languages that are deeply incompatible to translate. And so that was my goal, and so much of it is drawn from the teachings of Yogananda, who really pioneered this back in the 30s, 40s, and of course when the autobiography came out. He has many chapters in the autobiography of the yogi that are devoted to showing this parallel between science and religion. So now I'm working on another book, which, and you can all be my guinea pigs on this. This is my latest title. This is Neuroscience, Meditation, Superconsciousness, and God. Yep, I got some heads nodding, good. It really has a similar theme, but instead of focusing on the cosmos, the reality around us, it focuses on our consciousness and our awareness. So that's where neuroscience is really the kind of equivalent of physics. Neuroscience is red hot these days because of things like fMRI that allow them to watch your brain light up in real time as you solve problems or react to pictures, etc. And it has completely overturned much of psychology, much of cognitive psychology, and even the early cognitive theories, because they're now seeing it happen rather than theorizing it. They're seeing in the brain, so to speak, rather than only guessing from the outside. And this emphasis on neuroscience has really, really found a profound parallel to spiritual teachings, much more than psychology in general. Neuroscience in specific is really confirming a lot of what spiritual teachers tell us is happening when we meditate and do pranayama, and the description of what you're experiencing in your mind is also fitting neuroscience. So that's where I'm going. And as with Physics of God, I really base it on our consciousness being one with God. and that we also have this body that influences us and through which we perceive, and they all work together. So thank you.
Thank you again, Puru. It's a delight.
Pleasure.
Thank you so much.